Hello Art 1-2 and welcome to your watercolor mixing and technique practice. So we're first going to measure out our piece of watercolor paper. Then I'll have you gather everything, you'll pause me, and you'll get all set up for watercolor. Okay, so we're going to have a whole area for color mixing, and then we're going to learn 6 different techniques that we're going to incorporate, and you'll have a choice of what you want to incorporate into your landscape. Okay, so remember on the ruler, that first little line is 0. This does not have to be perfect, but you know, it gives us something to go off of. So I'm going to measure over to 4 inches, which is the big line to the right of 4. So I'm going to give myself a little mark at the bottom, or sorry, at the top and at the bottom of the paper. Okay, then I'm going to line my ruler up. And it's okay if you can kind of see these lines, it's okay. Then I'm going to slide the ruler over to where the numbers line up with that line. I can see it through the ruler, and I'm going to trace that. So I can see where the numbers are lined up with that line showing through. Okay, then, and pause if you need to. I'm going to line up that line with the 0, which is that first little line, and I'm going to measure over 3 inches. So 3 inches at the top, 3 inches at the bottom. I'm going to trace that. Okay, then I'm going to slide my ruler over and line up the bottom of the numbers with that line. I can see through the ruler. We have a little gap. We're going to use that to label. And we are working on a lot of wet areas all at once. We don't want them touching. So this is like the little border between all of our techniques. Okay, so I'm going to measure 3 inches again. So 3 inches, slide it down. And I'm measuring that first little line, which is 0, with this line that we just drew. Okay, lined up. Then I'm going to slide my ruler over so my numbers are lined up. Okay, and that one can be a little bit bigger. Now we're going to turn it vertically, and you're going to measure from the side over about 5 inches. So we'll go 5 inches there, and then we'll do, like, we want to leave this one totally open, so we're not dividing that one. We'll go 5 inches here. Okay, notice how I didn't go all the way down. And then I'm going to slide my ruler over. I'm going to trace where the numbers line up. Okay. Voila. So that's what you should have. We're actually going to turn it this way because we're going to work from top to bottom. That way you're not getting watercolor all over the place. Let me switch pens so you can see. So up top, this is going to be our color mixing. And then we're going to do a graded wash. Actually, well, yeah, that's fine. We'll just label it. It's not the first one we're going to do, but it can be in that location. A graded wash, this is, and that's a technique. There's another technique called wet on wet. So it's wet paint on wet paint. Then we'll have, let's do wet on dry. We're actually going to do that one first. Then we're going to do blotting. Or sometimes it's called lifting, in case you want to YouTube it. And then we'll do a salt and rice, because you guys should have that stuff at your house. So we'll go over that right before we start, which is pretty much right now. Okay, so you need to do this on a flat surface. I don't recommend on your bedroom floor. I recommend at a table. And I'm going to move this off to the side to show you everything you're going to need. So you will need your paint palette, that circle palette. You will need your watercolor set, which has 2 brushes in the inside. You're going to need a piece of paper towel, a cup I have just with water. So any old cup is fine, obviously not like your mother's favorite cup. I have any kind of rice works. So I have rice in here. And if you don't have rice, it's okay. It's not required. It's one of the optional ones. And then I have salt. So I have like regular table salt, just like in a shaker. I have the kind that you grind, like the salt grinder where it has the bigger chunks of salt. Like pink Himalayan salt works. I also have kosher salt, which is a little bit of a, like it's coarse, so the chunks are bigger. Any kind of salt works. And for me, I like the bigger the salt, the better. So yes, you can use table salt, but if you have other salts, you might want to try out to see the difference. So I'm going to try out all 3 to see which one I like. So I have that set out, and that's going to be next to me to the right-hand side. I'm right-handed, so I'm going to put my paint and my paint palette. I put my water just in there for now, off to the side. But before I start all of that, I want to make sure I'm not making my area dirty. And I'm going to take a piece of newspaper and I'm going to cover my area. So 1 sheet, just in case. 1 whole sheet of newspaper underneath us, because we're going to wipe off our brush, and then if your water spills, it kind of contains it a little bit. Put all your supplies off to the side. Okay, I want to make sure you guys can see that. Okay, I'll probably zoom in on that a little bit. Water, paint tray. Let me move the water up a little bit more. Okay, so that's pretty much all I need for right now. My other stuff, it's within reach. Okay, so for color mixing, you don't have to get this out, but if you're not quite sure how to mix colors, because color mixing is required for this project. So you're picking a color scheme. You can do all these in the color scheme that you want just to see what they're going to look like. So whatever color scheme you selected for your sketches, you could do on here. You can use the same color as I am. It doesn't really matter for most of them. So it says red and yellow makes orange. So instead of using the orange straight out of the paint tray, because everybody has these same, 8 colors, which gets really boring after a while, you can mix your own. So blue and yellow make green, blue and red make violet or purple. So you're definitely going to need to make your own. We're going to mix more of the tertiary colors because these are the ones you guys have more questions about. It's also the ones that definitely make yours look more unique. And the tertiary colors usually happen with an analogous color composition for color. Or if you have monochromatic, you're just picking one color, you're still probably going to use some tertiary color. So this is what we're actually going to make because it requires you to mix it. Okay, so for watercolor, the key is water. This is why they call it water first, then color. So you should not be digging paint out of these trays. If you're like digging paint out, you're using it wrong. So these are pretty high quality for student watercolors. I mean, they're better than Crayola for sure. And so they're made with gum arabic, so they're kind of sticky. And we want to not have the paint be sticky. We want lots of water so it's not sticky. Okay, so the first tertiary color we're going to make is red violet. And so I always start with the lighter color. Or if it's red violet, I would start with red and add violet. So and I'm sorry, this camera does not pick up color very well. I apologize, and it will look better when we actually watercolor. So I'm going to put some water first in my paint palette. And then I have water on my brush. I'm going to swirl it in the red. And I'm going to get a little bit more water to swirl in the red. So you want to get your brush like kind of loaded. I'm going to swirl it again. Swirl it again. So it's pretty red. Then rinse out my brush I'm going to swirl it into the violet, and I'm going to add it. Ooh. And that's too purplish, so I'm going to add a little bit more red, and I rinsed out my brush between. Okay, so it's definitely reddish, number one. Okay, then we're going to do red-orange. So we're going to start with red again, but I'm going to add a couple drops of water first to my paint palette. And I'm going to swirl in red, because it's red-orange, so that means it's mostly red. Okay, rinse my brush. Swirl in orange. I need a little bit more. Oh, that's really not changing very quickly. Maybe I'm going to add a little bit of yellow to that, actually. Okay, that's making it orange much faster. Remember, red and yellow make orange. Okay, there we go. Now, to me it looks red-orange. To you it probably does not. I apologize. This cameras don't pick up color unless they're like good cameras. All right, then we're going to do yellow-orange. So I'm going to start with yellow. Usually I'd start with the lightest color. Like if I had to make green, green and blue make yellow, so I would start with yellow. Swirl my yellow in. I want it to be pretty yellowy. Notice how it's like watery in here. It's water color, mostly water. Okay, then I'm going to add a touch of orange. So I rinsed out my brush, a little touch of orange. Okay, bright yellowy orange. Okay. Now I'm going to do yellow green. So same thing, start with yellow. Start with water first, actually. Swirl. Doing like three distinct swirls of, and maybe 4. Rinse out my brush, and I'm also getting my brush pretty wet to then dip it into the green. So remember, I'm like swirling it. I'm not like digging the green out. If you bring back a paint set that's destroyed, I'm charging you money, because every single one of these costs money to replace. Okay, then we're going to do blue-green. So I am going to start with green. Well, first, of course, water. And I am using the bigger brush, so this goes a little bit faster. So swirl into the green. And I can make my own green and then add more blue to it. Okay, clean out my brush. Little swirl of blue. And a little bit more blue, so it's more bluishy green. Maybe a little bit more blue. And then if you go too far, then you can always add more green. I still feel like that's still really greenish. Okay, that's more bluish green, like a turquoise color. All right, then we're gonna do blue-violet. So remember, red, yellow, and blue you cannot make. They're the primary colors, so I can't do anything to make blue. I have to use the blue. So for some of you, you may not have a brand new set, but I did make sure that all of your primary colors were there, just in case you had to make your own colors, which you're gonna need to anyway. It's color mixing. Okay, and I'm gonna rinse out my brush, get water on my brush, dip it in my violet. Okay, well, that's a nice blue violet. Okay, if it's too violety, too purplish, add more blue. All right, and then I have red violet already. Okay, so I have my tertiary colors mixed. I'm gonna set my paint tray aside. I might need it, we'll see. And we're going to write tertiary. So the one thing I want you guys to know about watercolor is if you want, notice there's not white in this set. Because if you want a color to be lighter, you just have to add more water. So the more water you use, the lighter it will be. And the less water you use, the darker it will be. So that's how you can adjust for a value. So I have my red violet. And then if I want it to be lighter, usually I would just dip my brush a little bit in water. And then it gets lighter. And I dip my brush a little bit in water. And it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, we're gonna do that for red orange. So I cleaned out my brush, swirl it in the red orange. So I have red orange, slightly dip it in water just a tiny bit, gets lighter. Super light, red orange, almost pink. Okay, so rinse out my brush. And if you're using a small cup, you actually might have to get new water because your water will get pretty dirty pretty quickly. Okay, so we have yellow orange. A little bit of water, a little bit more water. Okay, then we're gonna do yellow green, a little bit of water, a little bit more water. Then we're going to do blue green. A little bit of water on my brush, a little bit more water. Okay. Then blue violet. A little bit of water, a little bit more water. So it gets lighter, 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 lighter. So there's your tertiary colors. Now I'm going to show you how to darken a color, because we're definitely going to need to learn how to darken a color for our foreground, because it's going to be like not black, but it's going to look very, very, very dark. So we're going to do this with all the colors. So I'm going to take just water on my brush. So you can see, I would leave this set off to the side. I wouldn't put it on top of this paper, but so you guys can see everything. Water on my brush, I'm going to swirl it into the red. So I have my straight up red. Actually, let's add a little bit of, that should have a little bit more water in it, a little bit more see-through. So if I want red to get darker, instead of using black, I would use red's complement. So red's complementary color, according to our book, is green. So red and green are complements, they're opposites on the color wheel. If I mix enough of it, I'll get brown. So if I mix like almost equal parts, I'll get brown. But if I just want red to be slightly darker, I'm gonna add a little bit of red to my tray, a little bit more water, rinse out my brush, add a little touch of green just on the tip of the brush, and it will darken the red. That looks brown to you, it does not look brown to me. It's a much more muted, like brick red kind of. And the less green I add, the less dark it will get. Okay, so if I do that to green, so I'm gonna swirl greens just a little bit, and I'm gonna add a little bit of water to it. Add a tiny touch of red on the tip of the brush, and it will, it will darken my green. But this is what the green looked like to start out with. So you should be kind of adjusting. I mean, if I could add like a little bit of blue to the green, I could add like a little bit of yellow to the green, but if you want to darken it, you should use the complement. Okay, so let's try yellow. So I rinse out my brush, give a little bit of water on that. A little bit of yellow. A little yellow in my tray. A bit more water. A tiny, and you could use the tertiary colors too. So I could use blue, violet, and add a little bit of touch, like a tiny touch of purple. Let's go a little bit more. Okay, that was too much. I got brown. Add a little bit more yellow. Maybe a little bit more yellow. And I get a dark yellow, like a mustard yellow. I guess that could be a little bit darker. Okay, then I get even darker, brownish yellow, real mustard yellow. So if you don't want brown, you just add more of the original color. So I just add more yellow if I wanted to lighten it up. Okay, so for violet, I'm gonna add violet to the paint palette. And then we have a bunch of colors already made for our practice, because the practice is gonna go fairly fast. Okay, if I wanted my purple or violet, if I want that to be slightly darker, I'm gonna add just a little touch of yellow. And it makes it duller too, so it tones down the intensity. So if you don't want really bright colors, this is also what you would do. Okay, so for blue, I'm gonna go in the center. Okay, a little bit of water. A little tiny bit of orange. Okay, maybe a tiny bit more. And if you get green, you've gone too far. Or brown. You've gone too far. So I get a nice dark, like navy kind of blue. Get darker by more paint. Okay, there we go. Okay, for orange. Okay, then I'm gonna add some orange to my tray off to the side. A little bit of water. Okay, a tiny touch of blue. That's too much. Let me add a little bit more. And I get a dark orange. Almost brown. Dark orange is always like brownish. So if you need to pause and get more water, because your water might be dirty, do that. Ooh, that's exactly why I didn't want to do that. That's okay. At least it's for the practice. Let's get rid of that for a little bit. So I just did water with a paper towel. If it happens right away, you can lift it off. If it sits there, then that's kind of hard. Okay, let me move that out of the way. We're actually going to start wet on dry. So techniques are just a way of working with something, like the texture techniques that you guys learned. So it's just different, obviously, for watercolor. So we're going to start out with some really light purple. So I'm actually going to use this like purpley color that we mixed a little bit of yellow into it. And we're going to do like a layer of mountains, just kind of add in. And we're going to fade that down. And so you want to like be really gentle with this paper. If you press too hard, the little pieces kind of come off. So I'm going to fade this down so I fade it down with the color. Now I'm going to get water just on my brush. So just water again. And I want to fade it down while it's wet so I can get rid of that line. And we'll come back to this one because we're going to layer wet paint on top of this when it's dry. Okay, so let's leave that one alone. That's similar to what we're going to do for our background because your background is going to be lighter in value as it's further away. Okay, so for a graded wash, that's where it's almost like this, but we'll make it a little bit more intense. A graded wash is where it's darker fading to lighter, so you can fade from left to right or right to left. I'm gonna fade from top to bottom. But first, I'm gonna get water all over because we want it to be wet to help with the blending. I'm gonna kind of do a little bit more at the top. Okay, so very gently, so be careful with this paper. If you get little pieces, it means you're touching it too hard. So I am holding my brush in the middle. And if I want to create a clean edge, I can kind of outline the edge just with water. And call it like a water wall. I'm gonna go on this side too. I'm gonna outline the bottom. So I'm getting that all wet first, pressing gently on the paper. Okay, now I'm going to start with my blue violet at the top. A little bit more on my brush. and I'm gonna just use water to get that to come down a little. And then I kind of gently just like kind of run it back and forth. And if I want it to be even darker at the top, I can go back and add another layer. But you have to kind of let the paper soak in some before you build up your layers. So remember, if you want it to be darker, you add more pigment. And it's starting to soak in, so it's already having less water. I'm gonna add a little bit more on my brush. So not pressing very hard. Just water on my brush. Okay, just water on my brush again, and I'm gonna kind of just get it to fade down. If it's not perfect, it's fine, because for most of us, we'll probably use that to like fade down the mountains like we just did, or you might use it for your sky, which then you're gonna do blotting to lift it out anyway. So right here where the water's kind of like moving to the sides, that's called puddling. If you don't like it, you can just take a little piece of paper towel, like a little bit of the corner, and you can gently kind of blot or remove some of the water and color. So you can get rid of it on the edges. Or if it puddles like in the middle. It is just part of watercolor. It's just what happens. Okay, so this one's wet on wet. So we're gonna start with water. It means it's wet paint on wet paint. This is like one of my favorite ones. I use it all the time. And I'm gonna outline my section. Create my water wall. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it'll keep it from flowing into our graded wash section. Okay, so we're going to use analogous colors for this. So I'm going to use, I think I'll use up my red violet. And I'm just gonna kind of blot it. I often would use this for clouds. A little bit in the middle ground maybe. And you can have some white showing through, it's okay. So I'm gonna take a similar color. So I'm gonna use that red orange. And if you want it to like kind of spread out a little bit, I just added a little bit of water. So I'm getting water on my brush. So then let's say I wanted to fade it down to like yellowy orange. So you can still have like a transition. And I kind of would blot, like just so it's not so boring, yellowy orange. At the top, maybe I'm gonna blot like a little bit of violet. I don't wanna mix the violet with the yellow orange though, because yellow and violet make brown. So I wanna kind of stay away from that. Okay, so there's wet on wet. And again, we have the puddling at the bottom. I usually just leave it. If it bothers you a lot, you can just tear off a piece of your paper towel. I just kind of use the edge of it to soak it up a little. Do it while it's, I mean, obviously you have to do that while it's wet. Just kind of blot it to fade it out. So you can get rid of that. Okay, so then blotting and lifting. So we're gonna pretend like we're making a sky. Use whatever colors you want. It can be graded, it can be wet on wet, it could be a little bit of both, which is what I'm gonna try out. So I'm gonna start with water, like a couple brushfuls. Outline my area. Okay, gently kind of move the water around. All right, let's see. I think I'm gonna do that blue violet again at the top. But I'm gonna have it fade into my blue green. And you do want some dark value, so maybe I'm actually gonna put some regular blue in here. Because I'm getting water on my brush, a little bit of blue like out of the palette. Ooh. more blue-green in there. Some more blue-violet. Okay, then don't be so concerned with the edges. It's okay. We're gonna have a border on your watercolor anyway. Okay, so I'm gonna take my paper towel and I wanna scrunch it to where like I can see shapes, you know, of like folded kind of paper towel, or maybe like that. So I can see like shapes in there, or it looks like a flower kind of. And I'm going to blot and then move it. So I'm moving it to where it's not like that same part of the paper towel again. Blot, blot, blot. And I want kind of space. So it looks like puffy. And so I'm gonna lighten up my pressure a little bit. So it looks like kind of puffy clouds. And then later, we'll show this in the demonstration videos, but later if you then wanted to kind of go back and add in some like dark value, you can bring back some of the darkness. I usually do like the shadow part like underneath the clouds. Kind of blot. Make it look irregular. I like to do it while it's wet. We can always do that like as a layer when it's dry. So you can work back in. So it looks like a cloudy kind of sky. And the key is to have some white kind of showing. So I kind of move my paper towel so I have an area that doesn't have anything on it. I can still see the kind of shape, so I have like a texture. I can blot back out. So it looks like clouds. Blotting or lifting, that's what we're going to use for the sky. And for some of you, you might want it to be like, you know, not as puffy fluffy, so you'll kind of adjust from there. We're still going to come back to this wet on dry because I want it to be a little bit drier, but we can, just so it kind of looks like a mini painting, we can go back and gently kind of outline. So the one thing about watercolor is where the areas overlap, it's going to get darker. So that's why we would do the background. We're actually going to do the sky first and then the background. And we'll talk about like blow drying it at home to get it to dry a little bit faster. I'm just using one of my blues that I have here. So I try to hold my paintbrush like in the middle, towards the end, so I don't press very hard on the paper, because the paper will start to, like little pieces will come off. And I'll have to show you guys that somewhere. And you just gotta kind of leave it, and then it dries and you just pick them off. I'm gonna do a little wet on wet action. See if I can do a little bit of blotting. Oh, I don't know. Maybe. Okay, that's good enough for what we need. I got some puddle. Okay, let's let that dry because we're gonna do another layer kind of on top of that to show the layering effect. Okay, so for salt, you definitely want like a medium or a darker color. And I usually get the salt like ready to go in my hand. So this one where I have to like get some of it out, let's see, where am I gonna do that? I'll just put it in the lid. So I'm gonna grind out some salt. I just put it in the lid. You can put it like on a paper towel, someplace extra, and it's all over my newspaper. So I'm gonna try the 3 different salts. Very few of you probably have kosher salt at home, but if your parent or guardian or whoever in your house cooks like a lot, you might actually have kosher salt. So I have my salt ready to go because it has to be really shiny wet when you use it. So I would say salt would be good like in the middle ground, in the foreground. You could put it in the sky, like, well, actually, probably not because the blotting would mess it up. So the downfall of salt is once it's on there, you have to just let it stay there. You can't move it around. It has to just sit. And that's true for the rice one too, actually. So I'm gonna get a bunch of water. So salt, you want it to be fairly wet. And what happens is the little salt granules absorb the watercolor water and the pigment from the paint itself, and then it creates little speckliness in your paint. So it sucks up everything it's sitting on and that's around it, and then you just brush off the salt when it's dry. So we're gonna do this today, and then you have to kind of leave this in a place that nobody's gonna touch it. Just let it be. So think of right now, like, where am I gonna put this where people aren't gonna touch it? Okay, so I have all my water on there. I'll probably add water when I do this too. So I'm gonna choose some darker colors, just so you can see this all a little bit better. And I'm gonna just kind of use up some stuff that, tertiary colors that we have mixed. I'm gonna actually use a little bit of red from the set. A little bit of red, probably add a touch of purple. Ooh, that's too much. I do a little bit of water on that. A lot of water. Okay, what started out pretty well is now a hot mess. Add a little bit in there. A little bit of my red violet. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of work fast. So it has to be shiny wet, like puddly kind of wet. I'm gonna put a little bit more just water on there. Okay, so I'm gonna test out just the salt shaker. So I'm gonna shake some into my hand. Oop, it wasn't open, sorry about that. And I'm just gonna put some of that off to the side. So this is just table salt. I just want a couple granules, just to kind of see what it looks like when it's dry. Okay, then this is the salt that I got out of the salt grinder. Oh, this is a lot. I'm not gonna put all that, that's quite a bit. So I got that one in the middle. Not some of the bigger pieces, actually. Okay, set that on my paper towel. Okay, so now some of this kosher salt. Which almost looks the same as the grinding salt. And the table salt just looks a little bit smaller. Well, in my view it does. So just a little bit. You don't want to go too overboard because then it will get all stuck to your paper. It's hard to get off if there's a lot of it. So you have to let it be. Let it be, let it be, let it be, let it be. Don't touch it. Although here I'm going to soak up a little bit of that puddling just so it's not everywhere. A little bit down at the bottom, just in case you need to move your paper. And you need to let that set for a couple hours, and then you can dust the salt off when it's dry. So it needs to be totally dry before you do that. Okay, so for the rice, it's very similar to salt, but instead you're using rice. So I think the rice will look good if you have like a beach, like pebbles or stones, like rocks. So same thing, it needs to be pretty wet. Okay, then I'm going to move that water and do my water outline, my water wall. Okay, gently kind of spread that all out. A little bit more water. I'm going to start with my blue-green. And do my green-green. Darker at the bottom, yellowy green. And I kind of twirl in the paint palette because this watercolor will kind of separate a little bit. As it starts to dry, the heavier pigment particles kind of settle down to the bottom of the water. So if it sits there for a little bit, you're going to have to kind of... I'm going to add a little bit of blue to this, just for something a little different. Okay, I'm going to use up some of what I have. Okay, this is why it's on newspaper. Okay, so for the, so it's wet, like really, really shiny wet. And I might have to make it more wet, actually. Just gonna drop blobs of, okay, there we go. It needed to be a little bit more wet. So all the water is running off. So you'll notice how the paper starts to curl. So that's the downfall of watercolor. There's not a lot, I mean, it just does that. There's not a lot you can do. I did make a little tutorial on how to flatten your painting, like after you get like your base layers on, or like at the very, very end, you guys will flatten it when before you take a picture. Trying to put it more in the water. You really want it to be like, because the rice is more absorbent than the salt. So you want like a decent amount of water for it to work. And you have to just leave it. Leave it there. So that would be more, I would say this would be like in your foreground. I'm gonna definitely use it in my foreground. Any rice works. You want it to be super watery. You can see like how it's starting to absorb. Okay, there's your techniques. Put this in a place where nobody is gonna touch it, where the salt and rice aren't gonna get ruined. Oh, I'm sorry. We have to do this one. I apologize that we're all done. I was cleaning all up. Okay. So as areas get further away, they usually become cooler in color. And that's atmospheric perspective, and it's what Leonardo da Vinci wrote extensively about. And so the fact that the air and the space or distance between you and the object changes your perception of the color. And it's the air kind of in between. So I'm gonna go a little bit warmer colored. I'm gonna use my red violet. Actually, I'm gonna mix that with my violet so it's just darker. And so then I can come up and do like another layer. On top. I'm going to add a little bit of red to that. Add a little bit of red. And then I'm going to fade it down. So I have just water on my brush. And I'm going to fade it down. So we're going to build your landscape to where we'll do the sky first. Then you'll do your background layer of hills, mountains, water, whatever it might be. Then we'll let that dry and we'll come back the next day. I'm just going to put a blot in there a little bit. I have a bunch of salt. I'm gonna put some salt in here. Because then I would let this dry. I would come back the next day and I would shake the salt off. And then I would do my last layer. So we're gonna like progressively build up your layers. So you're not gonna draw all of the final draft. You're gonna draw it and add it in stages. But your sketch is there so you know what you're doing. Okay guys, hopefully you enjoyed the watercolor process. It's one of my favorite things to do in art and teach a little bit because it's fun. It's a little bit unpredictable, which is nice. Some spontaneity never killed anybody. Well, that's probably not true, but anyway. So put this someplace safe and then you'll photograph it when you dust off the salt and rice. And so you'll photograph it and you'll also we should write your guys' names somewhere on here. With Sharpie, you're gonna write your name at the top. So write your name. You should have done that first. I apologize. And your period. Okay, so you'll take a whole picture. You need to stand above this and take a whole picture, unless you want to do like a separate picture, a separate picture, separate picture. That's fine as well. I just want to see it all. And you'll write about like which technique you want to use where, and I'll take a look at your techniques and say, yep, that looks good, or like make the salt technique more watery, etc. So you'll get feedback on your techniques as well. Okay. Make sure if you're not caught up, you rewind and get all caught up on all of the techniques. We'll see you in the next video.